Howdy, folks. Happy Monday. It's April 20th, 2020, excuse me. Gee, I wish it was 2019. I'm Michael Lagello of HockeyBuzz.com, joined by our regulars, Jan Levine and Russ Cohen, and we're pleased to be joined today by Ted Starkey, who a longtime reporter, currently with Newsday, correct?
Correct, yep.
Yes. We're going to talk about some NHL items that are ongoing right now, but we'll start the show with our pre-show. Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, let's start with the Bulls documentary. It's ESPN is basically letting that run their station. It's between Disney and ESPN. It's going all the way through. A lot of it is just revisionist history. I won't even watch it because while I think Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player to ever play, I could go watch his highlights anywhere. I don't think I'm going to learn anything. I actually just saw an interview with Dennis Rodman, who, again, made it all about Dennis Rodman and less about Michael Jordan. I just have very little interest because you know what? They're not going to go onto those sidebars that we would need I would say people from 40 years old on would need to hear certain things that Michael Jordan was up to that they're never going to broach. And based on that, I have no interest.
Ted, it's tough to watch a document. Now, granted, I watched one of the episodes yesterday because literally there was nothing else on TV that I wanted to watch. And, and I respect Jordan. I liked Jordan as a player. I was, but I grew up. I was in my 20s when they had their run, so there wasn't any kind of great revelation there. It was nice to see like some of the behind the scenes video, but how many times can you watch Phil Jackson slam the door to the Bulls locker room or hear Jerry Krause say something about Scottie Pippen and consider it sort of revelatory? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you were saying, I think it's a product of just ESPN has nothing going on. Obviously with the number of networks they have, and they have a lot of airtime to fill. So, they rushed this project to get it out because they knew there would be nothing else against it. Normally we'd have the Stanley Cup, the NBA playoffs, and baseball going up against it. Now they have nothing to fill it. So it's kind of like, well, we can throw this out there and, people will watch it. I mean, from what I've heard, it's basically just a recap. If you know the Bulls, obviously if you grew up in that area, it was like this all the time. You have Michael Jordan.
Right.
But I mean, I think if we lived it, so it's kind of like what's new. And from what I've heard, there's basically just it's probably a decent documentary, but they really need to watch it again.
Yeah, Jan, I know you're a big Jordan fan. Now are you a Knicks fan or are you?
So I'll give this. So I am a Knicks fan. I grew up a Knicks fan. I think I've told a bunch of people. My two best friends in high school, my freshman year, were juniors who were big Carolina fans that happened to coincide with Carolina winning the championship that year in 81-82. So I've been a Jordan fan since his freshman year of Carolina and been a Carolina fan. I've also one of those who read David Halberstrom's books of Playing for Keeps. I've read Jordan Rules by Sam Smith. I have Rare Air by Vansel, who is quoting it. So yes, I will say a decent or a large portion of it is revisionist history. There are some pieces that I hadn't seen before. So the new stuff with Roy Williams, the stuff with Dean Smith, I've seen most of that stuff, but not all of it. Some of the stuff in terms of with Jordan, clearly they're not going to go. I know Russ is very much, he wants to hear about clearly the gambling issues from years ago. Wasn't that that'll ever come up again because there was all those rumors when Jordan stepped down the first time as to why he stepped down. Look, people are starved for anything. I thought it was really well done. I mean, there's 200 hours at a minimum of video that they recorded during the year because they had all access for the year. I mean, there was a really good article in The Athletic a while ago, about 2 weeks ago, right before, when they announced everything was going to go live, as to how they made the determinations of who to speak to, who they spoke to. Clearly, one of the things that was highlighted that wasn't mentioned yesterday, but it's been highlighted in press releases and conversations is Jordan's first wife, Juanita, wasn't interviewed. And there's been some questions as to why she wasn't talked to. I love the piece with Barack Obama being referred to as former Chicago resident. I thought that was pretty hysterical on there in terms of what they did, especially after having, Clinton was referred to as governor of Arkansas because he was there as the governor when Pippen was there. So
yeah, do they have to go down that road just because he was a attorney general in Arkansas, a basketball fan? He's an expert on friggin' Scottie.
But Obama, I understand because Obama is a big basketball fan and has played with, I think, Jordan in the past. But look, You're talking to somebody who would have watched it regardless, even if I'd seen everything already because I've read everything. Okay, I do think it was very well done. I do think it was pretty interesting to watch. And look, people may be starved, but the amount of commentary you're getting about people wanting to watch can't just be because people are starved for basketball or any sports.
Russ, let me just. I loved Ken Burns' baseball, but the problem was, all of a sudden he was injecting Mario Cuomo when he was a minor leaguer in the Pirates organization, when he had really no take, and he was there. And that was like, I mean, okay, you want former.
I felt Ken Burns' thing was great until the 70s. And then I knew a lot about the 70s, and I found errors in what Ken Burns was doing. And I was like, Here's the worst thing about this Jordan documentary. They are building up Scottie Pippen to a point that's just not true. The biggest thing I could tell you that I haven't heard one commentator talk about yet, and they're probably not going to talk about it, is when Scottie Pippen was without Jordan, they played against the Knicks. It's 5 seconds to go in the game. Scottie Pippen argued with Phil Jackson, and because he wasn't getting the final shot, he refused to go out on the court. And that left Tony Kukoc on his own, and the whole world knew Tony Kukoc was going to be shooting the ball. And the Bulls didn't win, and that's why Scottie Pippen will never be one of the greatest, because he didn't want to be there. He couldn't deal with not taking the shot, and he didn't win without Jordan. The other part is, to keep calling Scottie Pippen the greatest number 2 is a complete lie, because Lou Gehrig is the greatest number 2. If Babe Ruth wasn't in the sport, Lou Gehrig was the best guy in the sport.
Well,
you're comparing sports, right? And well, first of all, one thing, yes, the Bulls did not win that series, but Kukoc actually hit the shot and they won that game.
Okay, so but he didn't want to be there for the shot.
That game.
That's fine.
They lost the series though.
Right,
but he did lose the series. I remember that
series with the foul on Trent Tucker.
So that's fine. But what did you feel about Pippen not even being on the floor?
I understood to a certain extent that he felt disrespected.
Yes.
But I also felt that he should have been on the court. But I understand that he had been waiting for his time to be the guy, and he felt that Jackson had taken it away from him. But clearly there was no lingering effects, because Pippen stayed around for 3 more years and won 3 more titles and never said it.
He had a contract. He had no choice.
Jordan came back.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing with you.
No, not Ted. It's like ESPN. No, I so far I've watched 1 episode of it. I liked it. I will watch it. I will watch it again. Do I think it's like the greatest documentary ever done? No. I mean, honestly, if I had to think of ESPN 30 for 30s or things that they have done that are at a certain level, it's the OJ Made in America one, and then it's everything after that, because I knew about OJ in Buffalo when I was a kid, and how accurate it was in reflecting, his time in Buffalo. And even to the point, I've brought this up before, I think it was 1990 when the Bills made their first Super Bowl. OJ owned a piece of a place called the American Bar and Grill. It was a sports bar on Transit Road near the Buffalo Airport, and I was there the Thursday before the AFC Championship game. Went to the bar to get a drink. Was standing next to a rather tall and attractive blonde and said hello, and she smiled and said hello back. And then OJ came in and grabbed her and pulled her out, and it was Nicole Brown Simpson. So I have sort of a little bit of a tie there to hold that whole story. But it won an Oscar. It was a phenomenal documentary.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, ESPN is such a vast library, but they basically pushed this project because they knew. And it's fascinating right now too to watch all the regional sports networks. I mean, I was flipping through yesterday. They have Rangers games, they have Islanders games, they have Devils games. They're playing a Whaler Cooperall game at 5:00 here today. They're digging deep in the library, and it's fascinating because.
Well, can I ask a dumb programming question? If ESPN was so hot to rush the Michael Jordan, why didn't they work on a Wayne Gretzky one? His anniversary just passed. They could have done that.
The original 30 for 30 they did was Gretzky. Peter Berg had done it, all about the trade. It's actually the first ever 30 for 30.
Why not reshow it?
I've seen it. I saw it. They showed it again, not recently, but a while ago. I actually watched it.
No, but I'm saying they should have showed it on his anniversary. Like, why wouldn't you?
It's actually pretty well done. I've seen it. Peter Berg actually directed.
No, but you missed the point. They could have had a whole Wayne Gretzky day, and they passed on that.
Because it's hockey.
Well, Russ, what's going to be fascinating this summer is, we're talking about everything with hockey is, how is the new TV contract going to play into this? because I have a feeling that, you basically have, if the owners have to go without fans for the summer, or, if they lose the rest of the season, there's probably going to be some front-loaded contract coming in because, the owners are going to lose. The owners make most of their money off ticket sales in the playoffs when you don't have to pay the players off the cap. And, if NBC, they'll be desperate for programming in August because there's no Olympics this year. So what are they going to do? Say, well, we'll give you this extra money up front, kind of help you out, since you're not going to have ticket sales. We want programming. So it's going to be a fascinating dynamic with some of, what's coming up.
Well, if there was one thing that convinced me that the NHL will go to the nth degree to play this season, it was the fact there was the report that came out from Pierre LeBrun last week that said even if they have no fans, they will make $400 to $500 million on existing television contracts and advertising from Enterprise, Rent-A-Car, and whoever. Right. That just tells me. I mean, when you're facing $1 billion to $1.5 billion loss for one season, and you have a chance to make $500 million, and it's going to be play games in neutral sites with nobody there, they're playing games unless they're told by governments you can't play. They are going to play.
I mean, that's a big thing is whatever states will allow them to play, they're going to look at. And obviously, the North Dakota and New Hampshire have already said, yeah, you can play here as long as, everything's fine. And, I just think there's so much money on the table. And like you were saying with the networks, I just think with them being up for renewal, it's an opportunity for them to say, hey, look, if you guys play and do us a favor, we'll do you a big favor in the next TV contract.
And it's the escrow impact, right? As people have written, right? The money is needed to deflect or defer what that escrow impact going to be. And look, you can believe Larry Brooks isn't always tuned in and doesn't always think, but the thing he wrote in the paper yesterday where he said, potentially a couple of 3 years, he wrote a flat cap depending on where we land. Right. I mean, that's enough to strike fear in the hearts because you look at everybody now. There was 17 teams, I think, within $3 million of the cap. That's going to be a lot of decision-making that has to be made, and decisions that have already been made having to be reversed or impacted. We talked about when Chris Kreider signed, if they knew the cap was staying flat, I don't think there's any way they signed him to a 7-year deal at that figure.
Well, Ted, the machinations that went on over the last couple of days are really interesting because we had heard about the players basically giving back their last paycheck.
Right.
The PA pushed off that decision until May the 15th because they want to see how things play out in terms of the season. But the one thing, they're getting money back from the escrow from last season, from that 2018-19. So they're getting some money back. And the $140 million they're talking about giving back to sort of cut back the escrow for next year, that's in limbo right now because they want to see what the NHL, if they actually want to play games. So right now, everything is sort of in limbo based on what is going to happen with the rest of this season.
Right. As far as the NHL is concerned, I mean, I agree. I think they will play games, but we also have to look at, like the New York Times showed the timeline for vaccines, and SARS took 20 months and the mumps took 4 years. We don't know how long it will take for this vaccine. Nobody does. Yeah. We can hear all the baloney we want about that, but there is going to be a certain element of risk. And that's the thing. We right now think the players want to do it. We don't know in like 2 months if the players are still going to want to do it. That's going to be the big question too, because if they find out, let's say in 2 months, the players find out there's not a cure for another year and a half, they might change their mind.
Well, I mean, Ted, I believe the players right now, they're either going to pay for it now or they're going to pay for it later, but they're going to pay for it. And that's what I think the motivation is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the problem is like if you go the rest of the season and you don't have the playoffs, then, I mean, even if you have some kind of make-do cap for next year, the best case scenario is say, well, maybe we'll carry over some money, or maybe the other issue is it's interesting. I've seen in baseball circles, there also could be the issue of expansion. Because if you want a way to make some quick dollars, you still have a couple cities that want teams. And, if you need to sell pieces of the empire, that's the best way to do it. But
okay, so sorry, Ted.
Okay.
Let's fast forward to next year. Excuse me. The LA mayor just basically said nobody's playing anything in this city until 2021. Where are the Kings going to play next year?
Well, first of all, I think the mayor has dipped into his supply of hallucinogenic.
But he's in charge, Mike. So we have to go with the premise.
Yeah, he's also the son of the LA police commissioner who was part of the OJ thing. So I don't know.
He is in charge. He is the guy in charge.
He's the guy who's making decisions. So you can discount him all you want.
But you can make a decision like that and then retract it. And I think that in the end, he's probably going to have to retract it because he's going to cost his city billions of dollars.
Of course he is, but let's say he doesn't retract it. The NHL can't even make a schedule for next year yet. They can't, because based on the fact that there are some cities that are talking like this, New York, they're probably going to talk to Cuomo, and Cuomo's going to be like, I don't think I would put them down for playing at home next year. I mean, I can't foresee it. And so how are they going to make a schedule for the following season? That's going to be another
it's none of that. It's let's say you had the events, right? As other people have written, how many people are showing up? There are people who will not show up to events, and they may be a large swath of the population that may decide, you know what, it's not worth the risk for me to show up.
Right. The interesting thing too is you're going to see. I mean, they may use, if they had the playoffs in the rest of the season, it may be a test run for next year. Because the one difference between hockey and baseball is baseball, they're looking at 4 months, which is a hard sell for the players. Be away from your family, being quarantined for 4 months. Hockey, if you're, maybe they play a couple games just for like preseason / regular season to get people in tune, teams may only be there a couple weeks. And then you could say, well,
I don't think it could be 2 months. I think it could be 2 months.
Right. But I'm saying if you don't make, let's say you get knocked out in the first round.
Yeah, you get knocked out in a couple weeks. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if you kind of know, although the playoffs, if they do have them, they may be some of the most unpredictable things we've seen just because of the time. Mm-hmm. What Mike and I were discussing, the time between the last game that we've played, they play in June. That's almost like if you've been to the Stanley Cup Finals. That's your summer, so it's going to be very strange. But, I mean, I would guess, I know the NFL is coming out with contingency plans of, we can play in a half-full stadium, we can play in an empty stadium. Even if they can't play in LA, maybe they can play in Anaheim, maybe they can play an empty rink. Because the thing is, people forget, if you play these closed-site games, you don't need a place with 5,000 seats. Right. You could play, the Rangers could play at their practice facility.
Right.
No, I know, but I think the leap that some are making, and I'm not putting this on you, Ted, they're going to want fans in 2021. They're going to deal with no fans right now. Right. They're going to want fans in 2021. I don't think they'll start a fanless season in 2021 unless they know, if they know it has to start fanless, but if they wait 2 months, it won't. They would probably wait for the next season.
Well, and that's actually more credence to have the rest of the season, because let's say you finish in August, they say, okay, we'll start in December. That way it buys you some time before the regular schedule. Because like I said, you only have a certain amount of teams. And, right now it'd be a novelty. I'm sure by the beginning of next season, if you want to watch a Winnipeg-Ottawa game, the novelty be worn off. Yeah. But, at some point, it buys you some time, basically.
Yeah, if you start the season in December, you're probably playing into July, and then you're probably it's going to have an effect in terms of delaying seasons for 2 or 3 years, because they'll only be able to move back to a normal schedule of starting everything in October until there's enough time in between the end of the previous season, to have players rest and recuperate and things of that nature.
They're already talking about the NBA permanently moving their season back, which I think would be great. I mean, I would watch a lot more basketball.
That's something that probably should have happened anyhow. I agree with you, Ted.
Yeah, I mean, I'd watch a lot more basketball if it's December to July or August. I'd watch, July right now is just baseball. I love baseball, but if there's a good basketball playoff game, watch that too.
Well, the season used to start in early November. Now it's been moved back to the second week of October. Yeah, based upon wanting, to spread out the games as opposed to playing 82 games in a much more condensed number of months.
See, the NHL would have a problem with that, because they're trying, and we've seen this scheduling wise. The NHL is trying to. A lot of teams want to avoid their home games in October and November, especially in cities with NFL teams, because they know on the weekends everybody is watching football and nobody's going to hockey games. The NHL, their schedule gets packed from January to April because. And then it's all it is NFL playoffs, and their only competition is the NBA. If the NBA moves forward, then it's going to cause the NHL even more problems. So I don't know what the solution to that will be. Let me just touch on this, and you can get a discussion going on this, because Pierre LeBrun wrote a piece about Alex Pietrangelo in The Athletic, and interviewed Pietrangelo. And when he was asked him about his situation, he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. he was basically saying that he's keeping his options open in terms of short-term deal, long-term deal, because the likelihood of him getting the same type of money, I mean, he's a linchpin number one defenseman, Stanley Cup winner. He's only 29 years old, so he's got a lot of time in his career. But he was basically saying, I'm recognizing the financial realities of the NHL going forward, Ted, and that maybe taking a short-term deal until things are sort of cleared up and then getting the long-term deal might be an option for him. If he does that, he really opens himself up to a number of teams that wouldn't have a problem with signing him for a year or two. But I don't know what he's taking all the risk in that scenario.
I think what you're going to see if the cap goes flat or even goes down, the players they're going to lose are these medium type veterans, the second, third liners, because you're not going to get rid of your superstars unless this contract you can move, because obviously a lot of these guys, if you're a superstar making a lot of money, you can't move a contract. But the guys who are like the second, third liners, they're going to find themselves out of a job because teams won't be able to afford it. And like we were saying before, most of the league is near the cap. I mean, obviously there was a disaster scenario thrown around about 40% under the cap. I mean, that would be even teams at the cap floor are in trouble.
Right. And Russ, it looks like the Blues are planning for the days of without Pietrangelo, because they traded for and they signed Justin Falk. They have Parayko under contract for a couple of years. You've mentioned Perunovic is a kid that they had drafted and signed. They just signed Marco Scandella to a 4-year contract for about a little over $3 million. So it looks like they have their money allocated and they're planned for, well, if he doesn't sign, we're covered.
I think they both know he's not coming back, but I don't think he'll sign a 1-year deal regardless of the circumstances of the league. I just don't. I think this is his one chance, and like everybody else, he's going to look for the best deal he can on a decent team. So there might be a team that actually offers him 7 years, but if they're not a good team, he's probably not taking it. I think he'll take 3 or 4 years. But he's also going to get top money. And like you and I were talking, Mike, a team like Toronto would have a hell of a time fitting him in. I honestly don't think they can do it. I don't even think anybody would want William Nylander at his salary, because now, even though, like you had told me, it's like between 5 and 6 because of all the bonuses paid, when the cap stays the same now, that makes it more like 7 or 8 in reality, because teams don't have the free money. So there'll be some moving for Pietrangelo, and there'll be some teams that he'll want to play for, which we don't know who they are. But again, he's probably going to take the best deal, with the exception of it being like a bottom team that just has a ton of money. He's going to take 3 to 4 years, I think, and he'll be close to the top paid defenseman. He won't be the top paid guy, but he'll be in that top 5.
Jan, do you think it's a reality that, maybe he signs a type of deal that Russ is talking about, which is sort of what Kevin Shattenkirk did with the Rangers? He took more, He got more AAV, but he only got 4 years, and then they bought that contract out halfway through. Or do you think he gets a 7-year deal that's front loaded with signing bonus, but the cap hit is relatively reasonable, like in the $6.5 to $7 million range? I think that likelihood is more because he's getting the money up front, but the cap hit really doesn't matter because he's getting the money up front.
I mean, I think there's two things. First of all, with Shattenkirk, he took a quote-unquote discount to come, right? He had higher offers in terms of an AAV,
right,
but took less money because he wanted to be in New York. If Pietrangelo really wants to be in St. Louis and St. Louis really wants him back, I think the two sides find a way to make a deal to get done, even at a 4 or 5 year deal. But if not, I think he's going for the highest bidder. And well, two factors: one, highest bidder, but also team that has a shot to win the cup, because he saw how much fun it was to win the cup and what the ramifications therein are once you win a cup, as opposed to just pursuing the dollars. And he's been a staple clearly there in St. Louis. I mean, Parayko has stepped up a little bit. In my opinion, Falk has not had a particularly good year. Scandella was signed to a decent contract. It's $3.5 million or so a year. It's not overbearing. I'm a bit surprised they did that, but they figured maybe they got him a little bit on the cheap compared to where he might have gone. Perunovic, I think, will need some time to be ready. So there is a place for Pietrangelo, but I think also it depends on where do we land in terms of the cap. If it's flat, or even if there's a slight decline, then I think it makes it even less likely that he returns to St. Louis, even on a short-term deal.
Ted, I look at a team like the Islanders, and I look at a player like Barzal, and I thought he was going to hold Lou Lamoriello hostage this summer, but now with the instability of the financial situation, guys like him are probably going to end up taking bridge deals, and they really have little or no leverage going forward.
The Islanders are an interesting case because they seem to really be looking for when they move to Belmont. I mean, they really haven't done a lot of moves. They have kind of a decent base, but they have trouble scoring, and obviously they're playing heavily in the Trotz system. But they seem content to kind of ride it out till the new arena opens. And I think you're right though about Barzal. I think he'll take a bridge deal and hope for something more later. But the thing that's tough too about playing for a team like the Islanders, you're not going to get the points you would with a team that plays a lot more offensively. I mean, the Islanders are not an offensive team by any stretch of the imagination, and you're probably losing like 15 to 20% of your production playing a system like Trotz's versus playing somewhere else.
Well, and that's the reason. Sorry, Ted. I think that's the reason he doesn't take a bridge deal. I think he is going to make the Islanders cash in on him now because of that. I think his agent will go up and say, "Look, he is losing 20 points a year. You're making it harder for us to get a better deal. We want X, Y, or Z now." And if he does sign a bridge deal, he may only go a 1-year bridge deal because, again, he at some point, the Islanders are going to have to pay him. Yes. And they can't put it off for as long as the arena because now the arena has been delayed. I joked about it, Ted, about a couple weeks ago. I said, see, the arena was delayed, but it wasn't for reasons I thought.
I don't think anyone saw that coming.
Russ was patting himself on the back, though, for calling it.
No, I am not.
Coronavirus. Yeah. Okay, now an interesting signing today. It's not big news, but it's Mikhail Grigorenko, former first-round pick of the Buffalo Sabres. Had a decent career, below expectations for where he was picked, and I know that he was ballyhooed when Buffalo drafted him. The funny thing was he was ballyhooed, but it was also there was a lot of rumor going around that he wasn't actually 18 when he was drafted, that he was actually 20 or 21, which sort of skewed his statistics. But he went to Colorado, had a decent stint there, went to the KHL. Now he comes back, signs a 1-year, $1.2 million deal with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Russ, I think this is a good signing. I don't think he's going to be like he's going to come back and be a 25 goal scorer. I sort of compared him to a guy like Artem Anisimov. I think he's a good third line, maybe second line center at best, 15 goals, 40 points. I think he can do that, and he's got size, but I don't think he's going to hit a grand slam home run.
No, I'm with you. I think he gets around 35, 40 points, and the fact that he is a big centerman, 25 years old, I mean, that's a great signing for them. I don't know what the exact salary was. It 1.3 you said?
1.2. Yeah.
That's terrific. I mean, that is way good for them the way they're filling the middle there, because I got to tell you that for somebody like that who, and look, he was a 45, 55 point guy in the KHL. He's not going to have trouble translating. He's not going to have trouble coming back over and playing there because he already has. He maybe won't get Radcliffe numbers, but when you're talking about getting a big centerman at that price, that's a bargain.
Yeah, in this league, I mean, if you get a guy who can play, and it's a low risk, high reward. If he plays up to his potential, he obviously had flashes in Buffalo, but he never really lived up to expectations. But you never know. I mean, sometimes when they realize this could be their last chance in the National Hockey League.
And according to Pierre LeBrun, he turned down more money he was offered more money by, I think it was CSKA Moscow, to stay. I think it was like he was offered over $2 million and he took 1.2, which tells you, and we can talk about this, because we know that the KHL serve an uncertain landscape right now. Their salary cap, they're instituting a salary cap. They started this year. It's at max $14 million for an entire team in the KHL. And these players, I think, are reading the landscape that, you may in the short term get money, but in the long term, you're not going to get a lot of money, and there might be more stability coming to North America and holding a job.
I don't think that's exactly it. I actually think Pierre didn't take into account. I got an email like I do every week from the KHL, and up on Sportsology, here was the wording. Anton Slepyshev, because he didn't go with the Oilers, even though they were offering him a deal. Right. Here's the wording. But has committed himself to the KHL until the end of the current Olympic cycle. I think that's very interesting that that's the way it was worded today. And that's why I quickly put it up on Sportsology, because that told me something with that. And it's telling Mike something. It's telling everybody who's listening. That tells you that even a guy like Kaprizov now, because he would be on the Olympic team, may not come over because he's going to want to play in the Olympics. If he comes over, he's not playing in the Olympics. Clearly, someone like Grigorenko wasn't on the Olympic radar, so that's why he could turn down more money.
Yeah.
The players are on the Olympic radar, may be re-signing now in the KHL.
Ted, that reminds me of current Islander Leo Komarov, who played a year for the Leafs, went back and played in the KHL because the KHL would let him go to he thought his chances of making the Finnish Olympic team were better playing in the KHL and being on the Finnish national radar than staying in the NHL and playing fourth line minutes at that point with the Leafs. So he went back, he played a year in the KHL, played in Sochi, and then came back to the NHL.
Well, that also happened with Kuznetsov. Remember, Kuznetsov had the great World Juniors. There was rumors he was going to come over, I believe, in 2012.
Right.
Of course, then basically the KHL put pressure on him, said, you go over to the NHL, you're probably not going to be in the Sochi Olympics. So he basically stayed over 2 years, which you kind of want to look at the butterfly effect. Do the Capitals ever make the trade with Nashville? Did they get rid of Peter Forsberg? Then there's a sign. So
this is going to affect some guys. There's no question about it.
I was wondering about that, Russ and Jan. Start with you. We heard Sorokin was going to come over with the Islanders. We heard that Alexander Romanov, draft pick of the Montreal Canadiens, was going to come over. If they have aims of being on the Russian Olympic team, if they come over and the Russians are saying, well, you're not going to play for the Olympic team if you come over to the NHL, they can't be a blanket thing because, if Alex Ovechkin wants to play for the Russian Olympic team, he's playing for the Russian Olympic team.
Yeah, that's Alex Ovechkin, but he's also very, very high up. I think with the other guys, Mike, until we actually see them land in North America and play, it's up in the air, man.
Sorokin was way rumored to already kind of be almost signed, sealed, and delivered to be coming over. Granted, nothing has been finalized yet, but
correct.
This information now puts a little bit of doubt that he'll come over. And granted, the Islanders let Lehner go, signed the goalie because they thought about the relationship that Varlamov had with Sorokin would convince him to come over, and that was part of the reason why they ended up moving on from Lehner. And now you have to wonder, if that doesn't happen, if he's going to wait till after the Olympics, the Islanders are really, to a certain extent, by situations changing, ended up kind of shooting themselves in the foot. Because as good as Varley was, I think they would rather have Lehner for that kind of dollars anyway. And now, as you said, Romanov was one of those guys. I think for 2 years we've kind of talked a little bit about him stepping up and being ready to come over. Now, if he wants to play in the Olympics, and we also don't think that the NHL is going anytime soon, he may just remain there. And then once those Olympics are over, you can start seeing a wave of players coming over in February time in that year.
I think if it was 50-50 about them going to the next Winter Olympics, this current crisis made it maybe 5-95 against.
Well, especially the venue of the Olympics, who knows what China is going to look like in 2 years too.
Right.
You're less than 2 years away. I think it's always been a big bargaining chip for the KHL to keep guys because, a lot of the players want to go to the NHL, but they know this is the one thing they can say, we can offer you this and the NHL can't. And, but I agree with you. I think the Olympics are DOA at this point for, NHL players because I think they're going to be looking to make up revenue any way they can, and they're not going to take a month, a couple weeks off in 2022 basically to do that. It'll be interesting, too, with Sorokin, what the Islanders do, because I know with Ilya Samsonov, basically he took about 3 months to adjust to the North American game. And Lehner's already going to be up. What are you going to do to keep him in Bridgeport next year and start him out? Have to get a bridge goalie because he may not be ready to play in the NHL.
He may not be, but I don't think he's going to want to agree to that. But here's the other thing about Sorokin, where they may luck out with Sorokin. I'm not saying it's a guarantee Sorokin doesn't come over. If the Russians look at Shesterkin and say, he's our goalie no matter what, then Sorokin could come over and it doesn't matter because he was never going to be the number one. The only way Sorokin doesn't come over is if they promise him the number one job, but they may not do that because of Shesterkin. They may let him get a pass the same way Ovechkin would if somehow he could play in the Olympics. They may do that because he is their best goalie. Sorokin always has been number two to Shesterkin, so that's where the Islanders still may luck out with this.
Yeah, and they can't really ignore Samsonov either. He's got to be on their radar as well in terms of they're one of the three goalies. The guy.
He definitely is on their radar. I mean, I can't speak to who they deem as
Uh-oh.
No,
Russ is locked up for a second here. Yeah, I mean, and all honestly, Ted, all three of them are probably behind the guy who I would think would be the de facto starter for Russia. That would be Vasilevsky. But again, if the NHL doesn't go over, then all that really is moot. So
yeah, and I agree with you. As I said, I think it's going to be basically the Olympics will probably be like 2018. You'll have AHL guys, some fringe NHLers, and guys who are trying to get back in. And and then at the same point, I'm sure the Russians would want, obviously they want to put a good show in China. Obviously it's a big regional rival, but it'll be interesting to see. But as I said, with the league the way it is now, I don't think they're going to be thinking outside the box anytime soon.
Yeah, now just we realized that anything that was happening in the league and how teams were playing before March the 12th is pretty much out the window. A team could have been playing fantastic hockey, and when they come back in mid-June, if they start out slow and you're right in the playoffs, the team's going to get eliminated. But that being said, the Capitals, just looking at some of the top teams in the East to start with, I thought the Capitals made good moves getting Brendan Dillon from San Jose. Russ and I disagree about Kovalchuk because I think Kovalchuk is just an extra piece, and he thinks I'll let Russ talk about what he thought about Kovalchuk's effect on the team. But they seem to be on a path where I could see them as the Eastern Conference representative in the Stanley Cup Final.
They've been a fascinating team this year because the first 2 months of the season, they were probably the best team in the league.
Right.
The last 2 months, there was a lot of talk about Todd Reirden's impact in the locker room there. We had heard rumors that they were considering making a change. They had some pretty bad losses right before the pause. And, obviously now you can't really make a coaching change in the middle of this.
Right.
But we had heard that he was pretty close to being replaced. I mean, the irony is they got rid of Barry Trotz because they said, oh, he's kind of gotten stale. But, remember, Todd Reirden was in that room too. And you kind of saw the same signs of when the Capitals kind of tune out a coach, they don't work that hard. They kind of, play lackadaisical at times, and you weren't playing with much of a system. You were seeing a lot of that towards the end. So I'd be fascinated in a reboot if, some of that goes away and you figure, well, we've got him for a couple more weeks. We've had time to get away. They've been one of those teams that started out the gate great. But, there was always this dynamic in the locker room that you wonder if they really want to get a change. And if they realize they're not going to get a change, are we going to kind of flip the switch and, well, let's just play in the playoffs and see what happens.
I remember at the game that you were at, we saw them against the Flyers. They were lackadaisical at times. We saw that.
I mean, when they're playing well, there's very few teams that can skate with them. I mean, the other fascinating team to me is going to be Boston, because I thought Boston was going to be a prime candidate for we're going to run out of gas in the playoffs. Well, you're not going to have that factor anymore.
Right.
But, I mean, the Capitals, they just – at times they were just lackadaisical. They appeared like they wanted to get Todd Reirden out of there, and it just you could see they weren't putting the effort. There were a lot of games, like even January, they had a couple of wins, but they kind of pulled out. They had a game against San Jose. They were down by 2 in the last minute, scored twice, forced overtime, and won. But they really weren't playing great hockey down the stretch. But as I said, this whole pause thing, who knows? I mean, it's going to be very difficult playoff.
The thing is, I looked it up with Kovalchuk, who I didn't think was fitting in particularly well. He only had 2 power play goals in the year, none with the Capitals.
Right.
So how much space and how much room do you make just to put him on the power play? And if he doesn't produce, that's going to create tension too, because again, you can't have him and Kovalchuk, him and Ovechkin together on the power play because somebody's got to take the shot. So fitting him in is sometimes the biggest issue to killing their chemistry.
And he was go ahead, Ted.
I was going to say, I saw Kovalchuk as kind of an ad for the locker room. If you remember when Sergei Fedorov joined the Caps for a couple of years, he was kind of a parent figure for, Semin and Ovechkin.
Yeah, I think that's different.
No, but I think, with obviously Ovi and Kovalchuk are pretty good friends. And obviously with Kuznetsov, his off-ice issues in the last year, they kind of wanted to get someone in there. I got the sense it was kind of a favor to Ovechkin to get him on the roster and to kind of mentor some of the young Russians, because obviously they have Orlov. They have Samsonov. So I kind of got the sense that it was more like, if it works out, great. If not, it's a deal. We could send you to Hershey and bury you in the minors.
Right. Now, 2 teams that I think had issues going into the last few weeks of the regular season that I think could benefit the most from the pause one in the East, which was Pittsburgh, the other in the West, which was Colorado, and it was all due to injuries. If you looked at Pittsburgh, Dumoulin was out. It was just coming back. Justin Schultz had been out for a long time. They had some injuries up front. They're probably going to get Gensel back when the season starts, and that's to add, to the additions of Zucker and Patrick Marleau. And in Colorado, you had McKinnon, you had Landeskog, Audrey. You had a bunch of their forwards all hurt, and now if they come back in the middle of June or in early July, Ted, they're going to be 100% healthy.
Right. I mean, that's the fascinating thing. The only comparable you can remember in NHL history is when they had the players' strike in '92.
Yeah, it
was only 10 days, but a lot of teams that were going well into the break ended up kind of falling out of the playoffs, Capitals being one of them. Mm-hmm. And the Penguins, who weren't necessarily great going into the pause, they ended up winning the Stanley Cup. So it's just going to be a fascinating dynamic because, we don't know how much of a lead-in. I mean, you're going to have some kind of / regular season preseason because you can't just go say, all right, guys, here's a playoff round. You got 7 games. They're going to have to be at least like 2 or 3 games that they have to tune up. But, the injuries are kind of wiped off the map. Although the other problem you're going to have is some guys are more ripe to be injured. If you haven't played in, 2 months, you always see at the beginning of an NHL season, guys get hurt very quickly.
It's not going to be a perfect scenario, but the question is, I debated this back and forth. I know that the NHL wants to play regular season games. They would serve almost as exhibition games to get players back up to speed, but you're risking – the only benefit for those games are the teams that are a point or two out of the playoffs right now. Whereas if they play an expanded playoff scenario of say 20 teams, and those teams are in the mix, then there's no need for those extra games. What do you?
We do have some breaking news.
Go ahead.
Jarmo Kekalainen did talk. Jeff Svoboda got a quote out of him, and he basically said, Jarmo said that if you go directly into the playoffs, I think. It's going to have to be expanded from 16. I'm not sure there's a fair way to cut 16 teams right away. So he's already talking about going straight into the playoffs. Bettman's just going to be the last one to admit that, but we all know that's the only way it's going to happen.
I mean, Ted, right now, like Columbus is on the bubble. If they go to a winning percentage, right. Columbus is out and the Islanders are in. And I think if they roll back to 68 games, I think Columbus is in and the Islanders are out. So right. It depends on the scenario. And the cure-all for this is just expanded by expand it to 20 and have a best of 3 right. to eliminate to get down to 16.
Right. I mean, I think that's probably the fairest thing to do because it's really tricky when you don't know. Obviously, no one knew before this happened that you're going to have this kind of a break, but. You kind of have to say, well, you get your shot to get in the playoffs, or you get the shots to, not make the playoffs. And the thing is that, like I said, it's gonna be interesting if they go right to the playoffs. Like if you're playing you may be there for 2 or 3 games, and then you're done. I mean, like we were talking about, let's say a team like the Sabres, who know they're done. Like you're going to invite them to come back for a week and say, well, basically you get to go spend a week in North Dakota and get to go home.
Right. Well, yeah, that's why Drew Doughty, I think, was starting off last week, is because he doesn't want to come back because he knows the Kings aren't going to make the playoffs in either scenario. And when it comes to Buffalo, I recommend everybody read the Tim Graham article in The Athletic from today. Ted, I had to bring this up because one of the things that was discussed, and it was rumored, the Sabres were basically going in the tank the last month to 6 weeks, and there was talk that it was almost unheard of that Jason Botterill was going to get fired. But then the talk, like around the last couple of games that I was at the at KeyBank Center, the chatter started. Is he going to lose his job? And if he loses his job, he's one of many because the Pagulas are slashing and burning their organization right now, and it seems to have nothing to do with the quality of the job that people are doing. It has to do with their having financial shortfalls because the natural gas billions that were coming in are not coming in anymore. But how can you fire a general manager when the season is even complete?
I mean, the Sabres have been, it's bizarre because they've been, since 2013, they've been in perpetual rebuild. And you really have to wonder if there's something in the locker room or something going on because, they've had different coaches, they've had different GMs, and they're getting these same results. They play well for 3 or 4 weeks of the season. and otherwise they're a terrible team. And they've been doing this for, since Ryan Miller was in net. And you just have to wonder. I mean, I think the problem too with the Pagulas is they've noticed that the ticket sales have plummeted because obviously, the product hasn't been very good. And, every couple of years, hey, the product's finally getting better. Well, this year wasn't much. They're not a very entertaining team. They're not a very good team. And, you're basically getting a lot of your ticket sales from Ontario. And, so it's when you get, Maple Leaf fans or Canadians fans coming over the border, that's really supporting your franchise at this point because your product is terrible. And
I mean, Ted, at least, the Sabres are the Sabres. At least the Bills had the Four Falls TV special that aired recently.
Yeah.
I think that was nice. But no, I will say this about the Sabres. Clearly, they do have a locker room problem, and we thought it was cured with O'Reilly, and clearly that wasn't the problem. So it turns out now that O'Reilly looks really good at coming out of this, and there's still a problem there. And I can't tell you what it is. I've been in the locker room, but I'm not in it enough to know. I don't know.
I mean, I've heard, there's scapegoats from Evander Kane to some other players that they said, oh, these guys, once you get rid of them, they'll be better. But, it's the same problem. And at some point, you just can only change a coach so much and only change a GM so much.
Right.
They just seem to, look at a guy like Lehner. Lehner left the Sabres, went to the Islanders, who's tremendous. And, they just, it's hard to pinpoint what's wrong with them, but it appears to be some intangible that they can't fix. I
mean, look at two examples. Leonard had his off-the-ice problems in Buffalo, and they cleared up. I mean, he did a lot of work on himself, but he got getting out of Buffalo was a help. And then the Patrick Berglund situation where, he gave up $13 million not to play for this organization. And they essentially the article that Graham wrote talked about this massive dysfunction in the organization and the fact that the Pagulas are losing $40 to $60 million a year on the Sabres with no hope of them making the playoffs. They were nowhere close to being a playoff caliber team after, I would say, the second week in November.
And I think the Sabres are having the same problem like the Bills would have in the NFL is at this point, when you're a losing team, players don't want to go there. So you have to build through the draft or smart trades. And they haven't done that. I mean, if you look, the Sabres drafts, they've been average.
I think okay. I also think player development has been awful.
Yep. I mean, they're just not getting players in. I mean, I don't think, they've been trying to they're trying to play a defensive type system, but I don't think they necessarily have the players to do so. Mm-hmm. You basically only have Jack Eichel, and he can only do so much. He's a good player, and I saw him in college. I thought he's not necessarily a guy you could put on your back and carry a team, but he's a great piece to have. Yeah. They don't necessarily have the complementary pieces to go with him.
The best example of him having a problem is Skinner being great the one year and not so great the next. Like what happened there?
I mean, you look at that too. It's like even you remember all the talk after he became a free agent. They're like, well, the Sabres have to sign him, and you kind of knew like they're going to give him a ridiculous amount of money, and he's going to be average at best.
Right. But even an average Jeff Skinner would have had a better year than he was having.
Yeah, but Russ, the reason for that. And it's happened since the beginning of the year. Ralph Kruger came in, and I think he told Skinner, you have to play on the second line. We need two lines of offense. Yeah. We're putting you with Eichel, but if the other team stops you and Eichel, then nobody else on this team can score. They put Sam Reinhart on the line with Eichel, and they put a number of different left wingers, including Victor Olofsson, and they put Skinner on the second line. With really Marcus Johansson he's not a center, but they had him playing center for most of the year, and that affected him. And until you have the depth in the organization, and they traded only probably the best number 2 center in the league in Ryan O'Reilly. I mean, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I think that's like putting Scottie Pippen on a second line with Bill Wennington instead of Michael Jordan. I do.
Jeez.
Now there is some breaking news on Twitter in Chicago. I think a radio station asked, other than Pippen and Jordan, who's the best Chicago duo? And, of course, Taves and Kane are trending. But my question is, there was Tinkers to Evers to Chance.
That's not a tandem.
But 2 of them could be. And there's 2 of them at least in the Hall of Fame, I believe.
How about Walter Payton and who was his fullback? Oh, God.
You got me there. I mean, I'm sure I'll know it once I hear it. But
it was like, I think his name is Rule, or I don't know. I mean, it was Walter Payton, so he's the best running back ever.
Yeah, but that's like Hank Aaron, Tommy Aaron. That's not good.
Or Wayne Gretzky and Keith Gretzky.
That's right. High scoring brother duo.
Yeah.
Ted, we mentioned poor development in regards to the Sabres. I'm concerned with the overall development of NHL players because of they shut down the American Hockey League, no Calder Cup playoffs. Right now, if the NHL season's in question next year, you know that the American Hockey League season is in question. We know that the NCAA might be in question for next year. And we're talking about key years of development for young players. I mean, how concerned do you think organizations are about their young guys developing and being able to develop without being able to play?
Well, the fascinating thing is going to be like the last couple of years of the American Hockey League, you're seeing a lot of the NHL teams are starting to take over the entire organization. You know, they're buying their minor league affiliates. Obviously, Vegas has bought San Antonio is moving them out to Henderson. So I think you're going to see in the AHL, they may have more teams, because a lot of the independent teams are going to have a real tough time if you can't sell tickets next year. And you may just see NHL completely take over. I mean, look at what's going to happen in minor league baseball. It's going to be fascinating because
that's going to be a disaster.
I mean, those guys could be a year without playing. And that's, obviously it's bad for some of these prospects not to have the Calder Cup playoffs and a chance to play. But like you were saying, I've talked to some college people and, Boston University isn't going to be on campus till January. And they're saying there's going to be no games until people are on campus. What are you going to do? If you're a guy, are you going to, flip, hopefully, maybe the Q is playing, maybe the OHL is playing. You try to jump over there, or do you try to? What do you do?
Here's where I would differ. I think, as an example for Boston University, they're not going to have students on campus. If they deem in October or November they're going to bring in the hockey team because ESPN says, "Hey, we've got a contract with you," and they say, "All right, you know what? We could play to an empty rink," because they could, and they could house them on campus. I could see college hockey doing it because the gate isn't that important. I mean, it is. Don't get me wrong. I know they make money off it, and it does help the departments, but it's not an end-all, be-all like some of the others. So I could see college hockey going, and college basketball won't. They do need that money. They spend big money on coaches. College hockey is not as dependent. I could see college hockey sort of wormholing in a way in because they could do it before students go to campus. I don't think that's a big deal.
I mean, the only problem is more the quarantining, in fact, like how much you have to be quarantined because, obviously, supposedly they go to class, so, they have to.
Sure they do.
But, I mean, although, it'll be interesting to see. But like you said, the development, I mean, the young players are going to have a lot of trouble because, you're not going to have a lot of these tournaments. You're not going to have a lot of these chances to impress. And, as I said, like you were saying, what happens if the AHL goes dark for a while? Mm-hmm. More likely, I guess, you'll see the teams that are owned by NHL clubs playing in, maybe the practice rinks or maybe playing, just to stay in shape.
Hey, there's still a rink in Baltimore. I talked about the Skipjacks the other day with Keith Jones and Craig Berube on a broadcast, so that was interesting.
That's been an interesting thing because the Baltimore Arena, they used to play some Capitals.
And I will say this, it is a shithole.
Oh, I was going to say, I remember the last exhibition game they had, I believe there were holes in the ice and some of the plexiglass fell out. And so that's why they basically, the Capitals for 2 years played a game up there. But it's if they ever get a new arena built, which now obviously with everything going on, it's not happening. But they would be one of those cities that, would someone look to move in for the ECHL, the AHL. But right now, the Baltimore Arena is untenable.
I mean, it's there, though. It's across from the convention center. I saw it like 2 months ago. But I got to run, guys. I do.
Okay, we'll end the show in a second here. I just wanted to ask Ted one more question because I've had experience watching games in front of no people. Like I watched the Traverse City tournament when the Leafs were there last summer. I've rookie development camps, and I've watched Tuesday night games in Florida. So I've had experience where fans are not there. How will you react? And how do you think it will be for just the regular fan to watch games with no people in the crowd?
I think for the playoffs, I think fans would trade it off just because you kind of want a conclusion of the season. I'm not sure I would start next season with empty houses unless there's absolutely no alternative.
Right.
I think, the great debate is should we play the playoffs and push back next year, or, just cancel the season now and try to start next year. I think most fans would want a resolution this season.
Yep.
Obviously, it's not going to be – it's going to be strange. It's basically going to be its own mini season. There's really not a lot of connect to what transpired until March.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they could get away with for the playoffs. I think next year, I think you have to have some kind of resolution because I don't think you really can go forward. And obviously financially it's a lot trickier because, the playoffs, you're not paying the players anyway. Obviously the big draw for the owners is – you're basically selling ticket money that you're keeping 90% of. When you're starting to play salaries, you really have to make it up in some TV dollars. And that's the other interesting piece of this. Is NBC going to come up and say, look, we really need programming. We're going to give you a new deal with front loaded. You're going to get a ton of money next year for playing because you're doing us a favor. And maybe they do that. But you really have to figure that at some point, unlike basketball, which gets most of the money from the TV contract, like the NFL, who don't get a lot of money from the TV contract, hockey is still very gate revenue driven, and they really need to have people in the seats and watching them. And so my guess is they're going to end up playing some kind of playoff, neutral site games. And then, kind of say, well, we'll start the season in November, but kind of TBD, see what the situation is like. Most likely, I think you'll see normalization next year. You may have teams, if we're talking about LA, you may have to play games in Anaheim. You may have to play games outside the city limits. Or play closed buildings, and that might be the solution for some teams. But it's going to be interesting because it's a state-by-state basis for a lot of these clubs.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards them starting the regular season next year in November or maybe mid-November, skipping the All-Star game, which is always a plus.
Right.
Skipping the bye week. Maybe the playoffs start in late April instead of the beginning of April, and the playoffs go through the middle of July. But they have to play 82 games. I've heard people say, well, they're going to play 74 or play a 48. No, if anything, the NHL needs the gate revenue and the full money that they get from media and from advertising on an 82 game schedule more than ever next year. So I think they will guard that 82 games and they will play that 82 games unless there's something that continues to be catastrophic throughout this year.
Agree. I think you just have to. They make most of their money that way. And
yeah.
Like I said, the only bridge thing would be with the new TV deal. They're actually probably lucky that their contract is up now because the network, going into this, if this was a normal spring, they'd say, well, they're up against other properties. I think there were rumors about NBC and possibly ESPN getting a slate of games as well.
Yeah.
Now can they parlay that into saying, look, you need programming, we can give you programming, but you're going to have to pay us to make up for some of this. But I would expect they're going to try to get 82 games in because I think once you start asking players for buybacks or, prorating their salary, that's in a whole other can of worms.
Or compliance buyouts. And,
right.
And then there's been talk about them extending the CBA. This is that would sort of balance out the flat of the cap if they spread the losses over a longer term. So that's all in the future, but we'll see what they do.
Right, exactly.
Ted, great to have you. We'll definitely want to have you again if you're willing.
Absolutely, anytime.
Okay. For Jan Levine, for Russ Cohen, and for Ted Starkey, our guest, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just